Hi, everyone. I'm excited to have thriller and multi-genre author Jim Heskett on the podcast today. Jim has over 20 books self-published, besides staying busy with regular commitments like family, friends, and a full-time job. And so today I'm excited just to chat and learn how he is so prolific and so productive. So thanks so much for being here today, Jim.
And thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I was, listening to a couple podcast interviews you did, and then I read your book, The Juggling Author, How to Write 4 Books a Year While Balancing Family, Friends, and a Full-Time Job. And I thought, wow, so that's crazy. So, I mean, it's awesome, but, so I just thought for writers listening, it would be just so helpful to just to hear your thoughts on that and your writing process. And so if you don't mind, we can just kind of get into the questions and
Let's do it.
yeah. So, would you share how or why you got started writing? Sort of what was your inspiration behind becoming an indie author?
I got started with writing, I think, because I first fell in love with Stephen King when I was 12 or 13 or 14. I'm not sure how. I was young enough that I was reading up late at night under the covers with the flashlight, I think. I do think I remember that, just being terrified. And some Stephen King books I wasn't able to read after a certain time at night because they were too scary. But this actually occurred to me the other day. I think it was even really before that, because I had a memory of playing with my friends when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I was the only kid on the playground who wanted our playtime to have a narrative arc. And I don't think it's something that most normal kids have when they're out playing. That I wanted our playtime to have a beginning, middle, and end to the story, which is a bit unusual. But I think about becoming an indie author, I did chase traditional publishing for a little while. I mean, I've been writing seriously for 6 or 7 years, and for the first 2 or 3 years of that, I was chasing traditional publishing. But eventually, I was unimpressed with the speed of the industry. And a lot of the politics, or the alleged politics, the things that I would hear about from traditionally published authors I knew, and things that I would just hear about, the politics of the publishing houses. And I really like the control that being an indie affords me. I'm responsible for my success and my failure, which is both terrifying and awesome.
So, as you started writing and stuff, did you just right away know what your favorite genres to write in, or did that take you a while?
The first stuff I ever wrote was horror, way back when, because I was just aping Stephen King.
Oh yeah, okay.
But when I started taking it seriously, mostly, I have dabbled in a few different things here and there, but the most prevalent genre I write in is thriller, and I do that because it's just exciting. I like exciting stories, and writing exciting stories is a lot of fun. But to be completely honest, I don't actually read a whole lot of thrillers these days, because I often find the characters in them to be wooden and uninteresting. And to me, a story has to have a character that you can relate to and really root for. I think that's the number one ingredient to a successful story, is the characters. And so I try to write thrillers that are a little bit more character focused, and there are some writers out there who I think are doing that, like Max Barry is one, and Blake Crouch is another one, who I think write really interesting thrillers that have really great characters. And so that's basically who I'm trying to emulate these days.
It looks like you have over 20 titles out, and you've done all of this while having a family, friends, and a full-time job, and that's really productive. Like I mentioned, I was reading your book, and I learned so much. Your book, The Juggling Author, How to Write 4 Books a Year While Balancing Family, Friends, and a Full-Time Job. And I'm just wondering what a typical day looks like for you. Would you talk about how writers can make the most of their time and schedule time to write in between other commitments that they have going on?
Well, because I have a toddler, it's almost impossible for any day to be typical for me. For example, last night, my wife and I, our son decided at about 3 o'clock that he didn't want to sleep in his own bed anymore, and he came and he got in our bed So this means I got about 4 hours of sleep last night.
Oh.
And so this morning, I had a plan that I was going to edit a few chapters of my current work in progress, and I just wasn't capable of doing it. I was just too zonked out this morning. So what I did instead was I answered some fan emails because, no offense to the fans, but fan emails don't take a whole lot of brain power. It's usually just answering some questions or saying thanks for reaching out to me. And so really, I guess the lesson there is that I'm always doing something, and whether or not it's something that's on my list to do for right now, if I'm not able to do that, then I just have to do something else on the list that I can do. And so it's just a constant amount of shuffling and moving things around and always pushing forward toward that goal. So your original question about what a typical day looks like, the answer is there is no such thing for me.
No such thing as a typical day. That makes sense. Especially when you have little kids, that's true. So, in your book, you share your pre-production planning. I found that really fascinating, like kind of outlining beats, that sort of thing. So would you talk about that?
Sure. So I don't think there isn't really a huge secret to being productive when you have a lot else going on. It's mainly about making a plan and sticking to it. And with my pre-production, I don't go from a strict outline. I usually work from beats. I'm not a strict plotter, and I'm not a wandering pantser. I'm just sort of somewhere in between, in that I work from beats, but I allow myself a little bit of room to roam if the story needs it to.
Yeah.
And then if the story does roam, I'll then reevaluate the rest of my outline and make changes where necessary. I mean, I don't allow myself to go completely off track because I do have deadlines. I mean, they're self-imposed deadlines, but I do have deadlines. So about the pre-production, basically I keep a notebook of ideas, and then when it's time to get to work on a new story, which is usually when I'm finishing up something else, because I layer my projects, I'll be in between the second and third draft of one thing is when I'll start thinking about the next thing, so that when I'm finished with the third draft of that thing, I can get to work on the new thing. I don't ever really take time off between projects. I'm always working on something. I'm always pushing forward. But when it's time to work on a new thing or flesh out the idea, I just take an idea from that notebook, or I mash together a few ideas, then I come up with a rough synopsis. And from there, I'll know who my good guy is, who my bad guy is, what each wants, and the central conflict. And then that informs everything else. And then from there, I'll sketch out about 40 to 50 scenes, which is what I know I need to hit the length of a full-length novel. And then when it's time to go, whenever that other project is in a place where I can put it aside for a while, just open up Scrivener and let it go.
Just kind of on that, you mentioned Scrivener. Do you find that that's sort of helpful to keep things organized for you? Like, the folders and all that, the binder?
Yeah, Scrivener's great. I used to write in Word, and then when I discovered Scrivener, I didn't, it took me a while to become a Scrivener convert, because the first time you open it up and there's all these menus and there's all this stuff you can do there, it's a little overwhelming. But I just learned it a little bit at a time, and I still only probably use maybe 25 to 50% of Scrivener's capabilities. But I don't need to learn how to do everything. Like, I don't use the cards, the flashcard thing. I used that once, and it didn't really feel like I wasn't getting good enough return on my time investment there, so I don't really use that. But the folders allow me to move things around. Like, I wrote a novel that had two different timelines. And so I was able to write the old timeline first and then the new timeline. And then in Scrivener, it's just dragging and dropping to get all the scenes in the right order.
Yeah.
And that would have been a lot harder in Word to do.
Yeah. I find it handy that way too, because you can have different, like, you can do research, then you can have like different characters, and you can even like do different parts of your setting. I don't know. It's very fascinating. So
yeah.
So what tips do you have then for writers who are working on their first draft, so that they can write it in I guess a good amount of time? And I guess that varies for every person, right? But instead of taking 10 years to write story.
Right. Well, the first novel I ever completed took me 2 years to write.
Yeah.
And the second novel I ever completed took me a year to write. And then the third novel I completed took me 6 months.
Yeah.
And now it takes me about 2 to 3 months to write a novel.
Wow.
But my secret to first draft is that I write fast. I write fast and short, and that's about 90% of the key to my success, I guess. If a novel that I write will end up being, say, 65 to 70,000 words, the first draft is going to be about 40,000 words most of the time.
Oh, okay.
So what I do is I leave out some dialogue, and I leave out the flowery descriptions so I can just get the spine of the story down on paper. And then I'll have something it's a lump of clay that I can get back into shape and make it however I want. But the key is I write fast, and when I'm in first draft mode, I don't work on any other projects. If I've got a project that's in edits, it's in second draft, or it's in third draft, I can juggle it with other things. But when I'm in first draft, I'm only focused on that story. I'm faithful, I'm monogamous to that story in first draft, so I can just get it out of my head onto the paper as quickly as possible. And so if you're looking for a tip for writers for first draft, I'd say write fast and just keep your head down and get it done, get it out on the paper.
Yeah. What are I guess your next steps after you've written the first draft, for example? So do you begin then right away the rewrites, or do you do like some authors take a wait time before they do rewrites and stuff?
It depends. If the timeline between draft 1 and 2 or draft 2 and 3 can vary, it just depends on what my deadline is and where I am with other projects.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I do is I do, since I'm an indie, I don't technically have any deadlines. I could publish whenever I wanted to, but I impose deadlines on myself because that added stress helps me get things done. I mean, it's certainly not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's probably not good, not good for my health long term, but it's helping me get more stuff out there to put deadlines on myself. Yeah. But so if I have enough time budgeted that I can set a first draft aside for a month that I can go work on something else, I'll definitely do that, because there's something about fresh eyes that can help spot problems in a story.
Yeah.
A lot of times there'll be a huge gaping logic problem in a story, and if I'm just only focused on that from first to second to third draft, I might get all the way through writing it and not even notice it until a beta reader says, hey, there's this, you completely forgot about this character in the third act. Or something like that. But if I can set it aside for a little while, I'm much more likely to spot those things when I come back to it. Yeah. Because in general, I do 3 drafts before it goes out to the editor. Maybe only 2 if those first 2 drafts are clean enough. I mean, my first draft is never clean enough to be published, that's for sure. Yeah. But sometimes the second draft is. The second draft is clean enough. I don't mean clean enough to actually go out for consumers. I mean clean enough to go to the editor. Yeah. But so depending on how much time I have, there may be 2, there may be 3 drafts. I prefer to do 3 because I like to give an editor a manuscript that's as polished as possible to save time. Because for me, time and money are the same thing. If a manuscript is really unpolished, it's messy, it's got lots of stuff, then the editor who said it might take her a month to get it back to me, if it actually takes her 7 or 8 weeks, that's a huge problem for me because I'm trying to get stuff out the door that quickly.
You have it down to like second draft already. It takes me quite a few drafts to get it, but that's good. I get, and that's probably a process as you write more books. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of that is practice. Yeah. I think newer writers, there's so many rules you have to keep in your head, rules like vary your sentence length, and rules like don't start 3 or 4 sentences with the same word, and use instead of ran, use sprinted or darted or dashed. Don't use the same verbs over and over again. Right. I think when you're a brand new writer, it's really hard to remember all of those rules. Yeah. And so that's what your subsequent drafts do. You go back and you're like, okay, now I'm going to go back and improve my verbs. Now I'm going to go back and make sure that my sentence structure is varied, so I have a long sentence followed by a short sentence. And after enough practice and writing enough that those things become more like second nature, where I'm more likely to, instead of use he walked across the room, to use he sashayed across the room or he sauntered across the room.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to go fix that later. But let me be clear, I would never publish a first draft.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter how good a writer you are, your first draft is not pro quality.
Yeah. Do you have like, certain tools that you find helpful? Like, so, say you finish the first draft, then as you're going through the second and third draft, is there, I don't know, some kind of tools that you use for that? Like,
there are two self-editing tools that I have used on occasion. I like Grammarly and I like Pro Writing Aid. And sometimes if I have enough time in the development cycle, I'll run my own manuscript through both before I give it to the editor, just to make it cleaner. But sometimes I don't always have time to do that. If I've got time with an editor booked and I've got to get it to her as quickly as I may not have that extra week it'll take me to do Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid. And there's been times when I haven't used an editor, and I certainly don't recommend that. I would always recommend getting a pro edit, but if you can't, running it through Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid can be pretty close to getting a nice professional edit. Again, I wouldn't recommend that, and I would recommend using a professional editor if you can afford one, always. But if you can't, in a pinch, those software like that will do.
There are quite a few first-time writers listening. Say a first-time writer has finished their manuscript and do you have tips on how to get alpha or beta readers to read their books? I mean, besides their mom. Mom will probably say yes, but
Yeah, I would not recommend using mom, because mom's probably going to tell you it's great even if it's not.
True.
You want some beta readers who will be as critical with you as possible.
Yeah.
And if you can get an alpha reader, and I don't know if we're using the same terminology here, but an alpha reader to me is somebody who will read my first draft.
Okay.
And a beta reader is someone who will read my second or my third draft. But if I do have an alpha reader, and she's a wonderful person who she will read my first draft and then she'll read my second draft and tell me if it's better. And if you can find somebody like that, hold on for dear life and never let go.
Yeah.
But generally, I like to engage a beta reader after the second draft. I'll write the first draft, put it aside, write the second draft, and then engage the beta readers. And then that's when I take the longest break from it, because I want to give people enough time to get back to me. And I'll be
right. Yes.
I'll be very clear when I engage with them, and I'll say, hey, here's the second draft of my manuscript. I need feedback in 4 weeks. If you don't think you can get to it that quickly, then this probably isn't for you.
Yeah.
I'm looking for constructive feedback. I don't want you to tell me that it's good. I want you to tell me what's wrong with it. And, please don't worry about hurting my feelings. If you read it and just tell me it's good, you're not doing me any favors. But to get beta readers, I'm lucky enough now that I've got a mailing list built up that's large enough that I can pick people from there, and I've got a crew of beta readers that I've used several times.
Yeah.
But I think if you're just starting out and maybe you don't have a mailing list that's large enough where you could find those people, I would say, go out and meet readers on Facebook or Twitter and Goodreads and get to know them.
Yeah.
Just be really careful, because you certainly don't want to give your manuscript out to someone you don't trust.
Yeah.
You don't just want to go onto some random Facebook group and say, hey, I'm looking for anyone willing to beta read my manuscript, because you don't know what kind of shady people are in there.
Yeah.
You want to only engage with people that you've developed some kind of relationship with. And if you just spend enough time doing that, Goodreads or Facebook or Twitter or other social networks where readers hang out, you'll find people who are willing to do that. And if you engage with them a few times, then you'll start to learn who's going to be a good beta reader for you and who's not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is great. And yeah, I mean, Facebook, there's all kinds of like writing groups, and it seems to be so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what would your advice be for writers, how they can receive and then how they should apply, constructive, hopefully it's constructive criticism, right, from their beta readers?
So it's tricky. I mean, we all know those sayings about how everyone has opinions.
Yeah.
Which I won't repeat, but I generally do follow like the Stephen King method that he outlined in On Writing, was that if more than one person points out something, I should probably take a look at it.
Okay.
Or if I get feedback from a beta reader and I look at it and go, hey, yeah, that person's right. If I know right away that person is correct, then I should probably listen to it.
Yeah.
But I'll get feedback sometimes and I'm like, oh, I don't agree with that. I think this person just didn't get the story. But then if two other beta readers say that same thing, I go, okay, I should look at that. I probably didn't explain something well enough, or there's a logic problem there. But it is tricky because I have to check my ego at the door quite a bit, because readers will often know when a story isn't working, and so I have to look at that feedback and I guess the word is extrapolate it, because if it depends on the kind of feedback, because sometimes if feedback is super, super specific, then I should probably be critical or be wary of that. But if a reader just says, in this part, the plot twist didn't work for me, that's actually, it seems like that feedback is vague and unhelpful, but it's actually good feedback, because I don't really listen to feedback when people tell me where my story should go, like what direction it should go.
Okay.
Which is the reason I don't usually engage other authors as beta readers, because authors, bless our hearts, but we can't help but read a story and not envision what we would have done with it. Okay. So when I'm reading a book, I'll often think, I would have taken the story in this direction.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not, I don't know if that's helpful feedback, to say, when Johnny made peace with the vampires, he should have staked them all with his pencil instead. That's not the direction the story is supposed to go.
Yeah. So you share in your book how writers need to keep the long term in mind while making smaller short term goals for the interim. Would you talk about how writers, who are busy with family and full-time jobs and all that, how they can make a long-term roadmap for themselves while still focusing on a short-term sprint?
I think this is pretty simple, and that's make a to-do list and stick to it. Be diligent. Make a list of things I need to do now, things I need to do later, things I need to do someday, right. And constantly be crossing things off the things I need to do now. List, and moving things from the things to do later to the things to do now. Constantly be shuffling items from one list to the other. And so that's really what it is. It's just about making a list of the things that I need to do and being diligent about actually doing them. And it may seem like keeping a to-do list, a very thorough, in-depth to-do list, might be a waste of time, but it does take some time to invest in setting up a to-do list and staying on top of it. But ultimately, it saves me time in the end, because with a family and a full-time job, I am constantly shuffling things around to make room for all the stuff I need to do. And I use a goal tracker app on my phone. It's called Goal Streaks. Oh, okay. And as of this writing, the way that it works is that every day that I accomplish my writing goal, which is that I do something for my author career, whether that's writing new words or editing old words, or maybe scheduling a promotion, or composing emails to my mailing list, whatever it is, I get an X for that day. And then as I string days together, I make a chain through those X's, or the app does it for me. Yeah. And as of this writing, I've got over 1,600 straight days under my belt. Wow. And so that's awesome. 4.5 years, getting close to 5 years, I think. I'm not exactly sure how long that is. But I'm not trying to brag. I'm just trying to say that it's possible. Yeah. It's possible. Even somebody like me who's got a ton of stuff to do, it's possible that you can find time every single day to check off some items on your author to-do list and make progress toward your goal. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Do you have so you mentioned that you have something on your phone. Do you have something like physical, like up on your computer or on your wall, or I don't know, like a calendar or
I don't do that. I
no?
just use it on my phone.
Yeah.
But if you, I think if you're a more physically visual person, and that like if you have a workspace where you always work in, like me, I don't have a consistent workspace. I'm in my basement right now when we're recording this, but I work quite often in my recliner in the living room. I work in the break room at my day job. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
I'll work when I'm sitting at the doctor's office, you know, using the mobile app on my phone. I don't have one consistent workspace, so I'm always. I don't know if
Yeah.
a calendar.
Would do
I
anything.
don't know if that would work for me because I'm
No.
always in a different place trying
Yeah.
to hammer out words.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. So then digital, wherever you can access, is better. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What would be your advice for how writers can stay motivated or I guess inspired to make the sacrifices they need because that is part of it in order to reach the goals they've written down for themselves. What would be your tips on that?
I think it's easy to get discouraged.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at where we think we should be and feel like we're falling short of that. But I think, at least for me, I have to look at not where I think I should be and compare myself against other writers, you know, because I'm a member of a lot of writers groups on Facebook and I see huge successes from other writers.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to look at that and get discouraged. And so instead of comparing myself against where I think I should be or comparing myself against where other authors are, I just have to compare myself against where I came from. And I have to look at the little milestones and hold on to that feeling of hitting those milestones. You know, like the first time I got a review on Amazon from someone that I didn't know,
Yeah.
or the first time I had a short story accepted for publication in a magazine, the first time I held a paperback of one of my books in my hands, or the first time I won an award for my books. These are the things that I hold on to and push me forward. It's not always about becoming a rich and famous writer. You know, if I focused on becoming a rich and famous writer, then I would always be falling short.
Yeah.
It's about getting that next book out. It's about taking the next step. It's about doing a little better today than I was doing yesterday. And as long as I stay focused on those things, then that's the motivation and inspiration I need is baked in all right there.
I guess ultimately it's in sort of a longer term thing, you're kind of leaving a legacy, right? As a writer.
I hope so.
Yeah, right? In
That's
whatever you
not
write, really, right?
Yeah, I mean, the legacy, I guess, it's not up to me right now. That'll be determined later on. But I know I'm not curing cancer here, but hopefully I'm writing some books that people will help them escape from their crappy
Yeah.
lives for a little bit.
Yeah. Yes. That's awesome. Well, Jim, thanks so much for just sharing your thoughts today. This has been really insightful and helpful. Would you share what book projects you have or other projects that you have on the go, and then where readers and writers can find you online?
Well, it's hard to say exactly what project I'm working on because I have about 4 that are in various stages of
Okay.
development. The most complete one is a spy thriller that I'm planning probably I'm not for sure about this, but I'm probably going to submit it to Kindle Scout because
Oh,
I haven't done that yet, and I'd like to try that and see how that turns out. But that's the most complete project, and then I have others that are in various stages of first draft, second draft, or just planning. But this is where people can find me. My fiction site is jimheskett.com. It's JIMHESKETT.com. Or my nonfiction site, where you can find my thoughts on writing and stuff, is at thejugglingauthor.com.
oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jim, just for taking the time today. This has been so great to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.